This is Beyond Perception. I'm Simon Rilling, and today I'm really excited to have Philippa Wilkin as a guest, who is not just a wonderful human being, but also the founder of Breathworks, a transformational leadership coach, breathwork facilitator, and now about to launch her new venture, Versicle Global. And she's dedicated to empowering people to breathe the change they wish to see in the world. It is a true pleasure to have you here, Philippa. Welcome.
Thank you so much. There's always letters are a little bit difficult, and certainly versicle is a challenging word to say. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Especially for me with my Schwarzenegger English accent. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with the Transcending accent. Look at the guy. He's now the governor of California, right? So
yeah. What can I say?
Yeah, okay.
Hopefully the people, listeners, will understand me. And the both of us, we met at Synthesis around 2 years for the first time. And for brief context, Synthesis is an incredible retreat center close to Amsterdam, where psychedelic experiences are facilitated in a really beautiful container, incredible experience. And that's also where I had my first breathwork session with you ever. And it was completely mind-blowing. The experience itself was incredible. Energy circulating through my body, was vibrating, and I was also kind of a different state of consciousness. And one of the things I'm really curious, how did breathing or breathwork find you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it did find me, I think it's fair to say. And those experiences you describe, a lot of people, I think, come to breathwork and completely, like, out of left field, get this type of experience. And obviously it can be varied types of experience, but recognizing how powerful our breath is, right? When we really slow down and tune in, it's like, oh my goodness, there is so much here. And I found, breathwork came to me in 2014, when I was at a point in my life when I was transitioning out of my insurance career. So before the last 5+ years that I've been working more in the coaching sphere, I was in the insurance industry. And at the time I was really looking for my purpose and what I was really here to do. And I went to a workshop. I heard about this guy that taught breathwork and it sounded really cool. And I went to a workshop at a conference, like a mind, body, spirit conference show. And it was actually on my birthday. So it was on the 26th of May, 2014. And I had this really powerful experience in a workshop similar to you, in a group session. I think there were about 40 people in that session. And at the end of the session, like during the session itself, there were lots of things happening in my body, like energy moving and tingling. And my mouth went into this kind of squeeze position. I don't know if you ever had this, but
yeah.
I could really open my mouth because we're doing mouth breathing and all of these things were happening. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, what is going on? And at the end of the session, I didn't have anything particularly emotional come up. I had more physical experience, but there were people sharing at the end of the session that they had moved through some big emotions. There was some crying, there was some laughing, there was everything going on in the room. And I just knew from that moment on that I needed to do more of it. So I had, a nice experience, a powerful experience in the physical, but I just knew that there was something more in it for me. And so following on from that, I signed up to just take a personal course for me. I was very much I've been in the personal development field probably for the last 10 years or so, and signed up for a course. And it went from there. I need to know more. I want to know more. This is really interesting. I'm having these experiences. And it was an extra layer for me to be able to tap into and resolve some of my emotional things, because I'd started on that route with talk therapy a few years before, but I'd found that there were certain limitations to that. And what I was finding with breathwork was a different way to access some of that emotional content, perhaps from the past, and release it in a way that was healthy and that was actually integrating, so that I could kind of expand and move on. So that was really how I found it. And then I came to be working with it. And latterly, when I did choose to leave my job later that year, I decided I would just do the facilitator training because I was interested. And heaven forbid, then I become a facilitator the next year, and then traveled the world for a while teaching these techniques, and then subsequently came to synthesis. A couple of years later as well, as it was being established with by one of my friends at the time. And so, that's a little bit of the history of how I came to breathwork. And it just amazes me every time how potent it is. How did you find after your first experience? Did you move on and pick up with breathwork when you were back at home?
Yes, so I was actually very surprised, and that's also because, like, I mean, like, some of the listeners might think, well, breathing, that's something we all do anyway. Like, this is like, what's the point? Like,
what are these crazy people talking about? I'm breathing. I've been doing it my whole life.
I mean, like, we're all breathing, otherwise we would be deaf. And one of the things which stuck with me from the session with you, that I think you were looking at the way I was breathing, and you, when I remember it correctly, you told me that I'm mostly breathing through my belly and I'm not breathing into my chest. And I think you said something along the lines, like, the way you're breathing, your heart and mind are not aligned, or something like that, if I remember it correctly. And that was really interesting to think that whatever I experience, or the way I perceive the world, is reflected in the way I'm breathing. And I'm not sure if this makes sense or if this is truth, but that was interesting. And, like, is that the case, that like everything is reflected in the breathing, or
Yeah, it's quite magical, really. That was part of my teaching, and looking at and analyzing the patterns of how we breathe, because breathing is actually a behavior. And this is why many of us have dysfunctional breathing, because we've learned dysfunctional breathing behaviors over time. And so when we look at the breath, often I do this when somebody's lying down, I just observe how they breathe, where their body moves, where there is no movement. That gives me an indication of really where I say the energy is stuck. That might sound a bit woo-woo, but we want to have flexibility in our system, in our body, right? This for me really is resilience. It's having a flexible nervous system. It's having a flexible body that moves, that functions well. And so when you look at how somebody breathes, there are usually three distinct patterns. There's the chest breathing, which is very much kind of the shoulder or neck movement, and really activates our sympathetic nervous system. So the fight or flight response, the stress response. And many of us have that dysfunctional pattern for whatever reason. We've adapted over time. Likewise, there's often, which I think you referenced, abdominal breathing. So ideally, we want to be breathing with the diaphragm, with our diaphragm that sits below our ribs. And when we breathe using our diaphragm, which is the primary muscle for breathing, our abdomen moves. So that's what I refer to as belly breathing, which really we all should do, because when we're breathing into our abdomen, we're activating that diaphragm, which is getting us a full breath. And often people that are just chest breathing, they have a lot of stress and tension in their shoulders. They might experience symptoms of panic or anxiety and these kind of things, which physiologically are caused by this breathing pattern that they don't necessarily even know that they have. And then the third pattern is often what we call our perfectionist breather, the one that likes to be in control, and there's a certain pattern with that. And so ideally what we're looking for holistically is this kind of flexibility all round. So if we're really breathing in our abdomen, is great, but also we want to be breathing in our chest. And that might have been what I said to you in terms of grounding, very grounded and very practical, but perhaps guarded in our chest, which I think many of us are. We're guarded around our hearts, you know. Vulnerability for human beings is really, really challenging, particularly for men. And so that's often what I find is quite a typical pattern for men, is they breathe sometimes very well in their abdomen, but their chest is very closed and rigid, for example. So it's just about finding that balance. And so when we look at and analyze what's happening with our breathing, this is the beauty with our breath, is it's the one physiological function that we really have control over, and we can consciously choose to change. And in doing so, we then can change our physical and our mental and our emotional state, as you're describing, right? We go into different states of consciousness just by how we modulate, how we choose to breathe, which is kind of crazy, but it's kind of cool.
And yeah, I mean, and like I guess for someone who has not experienced like this breath work, it's maybe difficult to grasp. And what I was just thinking is, like, the way we breathe, is that an adaptation to whatever happens to us or how we perceive the world, or is it that we start breathing, or we don't learn how to breathe, and that's why we then like have certain how to say, like, is it like, does it work in both ways? Like, I experience something and that's why I adapt my breathing, or my breathing changes to reflect that stress situation? Or is it that I'm breathing like in a not optimal way, maybe I never learned it, and that's why I'm experiencing certain like stress situations or
symptoms, yeah, that's a great point and a great question. For me, I think it comes down to all of that, because physiologically our body is designed to respond to a threat. So if we, instead of now having a lion or a tiger chasing us, now we have the email or the deadline at work. It's the same stress response, and triggered by our perception. Oh, you know, I now have to do this thing, oh my goodness. And so this is triggering the physiological response in the body. Also, likewise, we might have a trauma, you know, we might be involved in an accident, something like that, which our body automatically goes into some kind of protective state or fires up to run away. And then on top of that, what happens is that our emotions and our breathing are related. So often when we don't want to get upset, we don't want to cry, we don't want to get angry, whatever it is, the breath is a really easy way of repressing or suppressing our emotional expression. And so particularly as children, maybe we weren't allowed to make sound, or, you know, we had grumpy or aggressive, you know, tendencies in our family. It was like best to keep quiet, or whatever the reason. Often we learn this response of, okay, if I don't want to get upset, I don't want to get angry, often we hold our breath. And so after a while, when we hold our breath, that emotion that's present often passes or dissipates, and we get on with our life. But in my experience, what happens when we do that over and over in a chronic way is that we actually hold on to that emotional tension in the body. And so that's also can impact these patterns of breathing behavior, because our muscles start to get tense. Maybe we're not breathing in our abdomen, because when we breathe fully in our abdomen, we feel things. And so if we don't want to feel things, the tendency will be to breathe in the chest. Just as humans like to, you know, we're not really pleasure seeking, we're pain avoiding, right? That's like the default position. And so that I find tends to create a combination of those things creates the dysfunctional breathing patterns. And the counter to that is to start being aware of your breathing pattern and how you breathe. And for example, in those moments where you catch yourself stressed at the computer and now, oh, I'm holding my breath. And I think just to talk about computers and our posture and our moved to a sedentary lifestyle as well over the last however many decades, or particularly the last 20 years of office-based work, is that sitting over a desk, sitting down a lot. I mean, I know you do a lot of movement practices, you're a really healthy kind of outdoor guy too, is that our postures, our modern ways of life also restrict our capacity to breathe and the way that we breathe. And there's a really interesting book that I haven't read yet that's just come out, and it's called Breath by a guy called James Nestor.
Okay.
And it's about the ancient, modern science to ancient techniques, something like that. And he talks about, I listened to a podcast a few days ago, how the way that our modern industrial food has changed our airways and actually made our airways smaller, because now with industrial processed food, we don't chew as much. So we don't have as much tone in our throat and our, cavities, which I was just like, oh, wow, that was completely new to me. So I think we underestimate.
That's interesting. It makes sense in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
How much our modern lifestyles impact our physiology without realizing it. As before we started recording this, we're talking about how we do things unconsciously. And we just go into a state of being. And I think that's endemic of what happens when our breathing changes and adapts. We don't even notice. It's just happening. But it can be changed, when we start to pay attention.
And what you say, that just becoming conscious of my breathing and doing it consciously, like in a more relaxed way, or more is already a first step. But then what's the difference to the breath work you facilitate? Because when I understand what I just understood is that we're experiencing trauma throughout our like everybody does, and we might not express it, or like the emotions we're experiencing, and they might get stuck as a blocked energy. And is that what breathwork helps with, to release stored emotions, or maybe trauma which we might not have experienced fully? Or
yes. in one word, yes. In the same way that we use the breath to control and suppress, we can use the breath to move through some of this emotional energy, express some of this energy, to actually come to a place of neutral. So with something like, now there's much more study in the world of trauma and how best to process and integrate trauma. And part of that is the recognition that much of the trauma that manifests in the body is actually a result of our natural stress response being curtailed and not being able to go through this full arc of expression and come back to neutral. And so in an example, somebody's in a war environment. I mean, this is quite an extreme case, but they've got to be on their game, and all of this carnage is happening around them. They're in this intense, stressful response, but in that moment, they have to be detached from everything that's happening, even though physiologically things are happening in their body, right? It's almost like that mind over matter piece. And so if you then take that person afterwards, they have all of this almost like a sympathetic nervous system energy that has yet to be resolved to completion. And so this is how I see working with the breath, is that we can actually use the breath to resolve these stress responses to completion. And when we do, actually they integrate and they go away as symptoms, because often what's happening, that unresolved energy, that unresolved emotion, whatever it is manifesting in some physical form, whether it's an ache, whether it's a pain, whether it's a restriction, or it could be manifesting in thought forms. And for me, that's a way that the body is saying, come back, pay attention to this thing, it needs resolving. And until we do that, we're going to keep stuck in that loop. It's a little bit like having the tabs on the internet of the computer open. It's like, oh, how many tabs?
Okay, that's interesting. You just said that, and that's something I wanted to ask you. how thoughts and emotion relate, or do they relate, and is one the cause of the other? Or because I mean, they're also, in terms of personal development, or like maybe awareness training or whatever, they're just with the mind, or thinking about situations, or becoming aware maybe what past experiences might have like caused certain patterns or not, and so there's in a sense an intellectual understanding maybe of what has happened, yeah, and that can possibly be relieving in itself. But is there then is the emotional experience, is that another dimension, if you will, or is it also possible, or is it like a holistic or is there what's the relationship, between emotions and thoughts? Can you, by speaking about something, release it, or is there a component which is maybe just accessible through maybe other modalities such as breath work?
Yeah, great question. Something I like to say about breathwork often, particularly for men, particularly to men, because this, and I think this is appealing in many ways to many people, is that breathwork is like therapy, but without having to talk.
And do you need to be conscious? Do you need to know about what might be the situation in order to experience or release it? Or can that do you not even need to know about what is there to experience and release it?
No, often not. That's a good question also, because how I see it working is that, and this was my avenue into breathwork as well. I had done talk therapy for a number of years, and I continue to. I think it's great, but it has limitations in the sense that where we're mentally conceptualizing something all the time, it can actually be a way of avoiding or not really contacting and getting in touch with the the emotional component of the story of the situation. And actually, what I find is the thought forms can continue to arise where the underlying emotional energy isn't dealt with. So we can use the talking and the stories as a way of actually activating the emotion, because that's really what breathwork, when we get into breathwork and some of the other work that I do, is we want to activate the emotion to feel it and allow the energy of it to run through us. And then in the running through us, it actually dissipates and resolves itself. And so, like I said, we can do that by identifying the story or the particular thing that we want to work with. We can also do that with setting an intention. And you might remember when we did this in the session, is that I always invite people to set an intention, to ask for something they want in a session. And what my belief is that when we do breath work, we're going internally, right? And the higher part of us, the deeper wisdom that resides in us, knows beyond the rational mind what is required for us to shift or move through or release something. And so this is the beauty of, I guess, breath, in the sense of it's like offering a prayer with a particular intention of this is where we're going. And so there can be a conscious part of it. I've already identified this story or this thing that's going on for me. Or it could be, actually, I want to move to, I've got so many things going on right now. I want to move to a place of calm and clarity. And we set the intention there. And when we tend to move often, and we could talk about this as well in relation to the psychedelic retreat, often as humans, we are so stuck in our own perception of our kind of rigid mental box. And many people that I speak to when I do my workshops, they say, who thinks that their body is just to take their head from A to B? Like this, right?
Yeah.
And loads of people put their hands up. And I think that was why at the retreat, the breathwork was so powerful, because many people hadn't had that type of experience of what their body was able to do with absolutely no substance, just air.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way I describe it is when we're going into that space of setting an intention, we're really moving out of our conscious mind, even though it's still there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're moving a little bit out of the ego or the control, perhaps, and we're moving into the body. And what I often say is that when you cut your hand, you don't think about how to heal your hand. Your body has this natural intelligence and it fixes it together. And so the same is true of the breath and your body has its own intelligence. So often by doing a breathwork session, which I believe we go into these altered states just by using our body, we then move our more rational conscious mind out of the way and allow our body to do what it needs to do. And so sometimes we think we're going over here, but actually there's a load of other things that come to the surface, which we might have completely forgotten about, but they're still laying dormant and they're almost ripe for resolution right now. It's the body saying, no, this is the priority. This is what we need to move out of the way. And so it's a really beautiful exercise, I guess, of reconnecting with our body, the intelligence of our body, rather than thinking we have to do everything with our mind all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's super interesting. And what I'm wondering is, I mean, on the one hand, everybody experiences trauma, but there are also severe cases of like real trauma. And maybe then there's also this maybe survival response of like kind of like packing that trauma somewhere else, because otherwise you might not kind of like handle that situation, and so it might still be there. And so like my question is what you just said. It's really interesting that like does the body intelligence like releases always, and I'm asking, just as much as you can deal with, or are there situations also where maybe through breath work or other modalities, like you're kind of like opening the Pandora's box and you're kind of like maybe experiencing something which is just like it's too much to deal with? Or like, because you said like if you're setting that intention, like your body takes care of it, like
yeah, that's a really good point. And this is where I always say it's really important to find the right therapist to work with if you want to work with somebody. On the other hand, my belief is that you get what you're ready for. You don't get anything that you can't handle or can't deal with. It might be a little bit outside of your comfort zone. It might be outside of your known reality or perception up until this point. Doesn't mean to say it's bad, but it can be different. Where, for example, if we've been very numb, and this is one of the reasons that I came to this work at some point as well, is that I was quite numb to my emotions. So if we go from a place of being relatively numb to our emotions, and now we're starting to feel things and we're becoming sensitive or more sensitive to our environment, then that does have an impact, because now we have to adapt and change to how we're now feeling, right? From being numb to now feeling things. And how it typically works is like I refer in the trauma field as titration. And I describe as, which is like a little bit at a time. You know, in the chemistry, did you ever do those chemistry experiments where you put the little drip, drip, drip to make the change of color? Or like this.
Oh, I can't remember. Possibly, I don't know. How is
cool.
it called? Titration. And how I see the breath is as if we have a fizzy bottle of soda. And when we do breath work, we're taking the gas out a little part at a time, little piece at a time, rather than like everything. And so in this way, it's a lot easier to integrate into life. And this is one of the reasons that I was an advocate for including breathwork in the psychedelic program, because I felt, okay, these experiences, and I was relatively late to that scene, these experiences are very, very powerful.
And they can, as you say, open a Pandora's box in many ways. And so I wanted to make sure that people had a support or another way of accessing altered states to continue to do that emotional integration work, to continue to explore their own consciousness with a tool that they had at their disposal. And that was really my interest in getting involved in the retreat at the outset, to be honest, was integration. And so I feel it's a really good support in that way. And, you know, we don't need, the breath is a medicine as far as I'm concerned. So also when we're doing a session, so I often do, there's a guided work online in groups and one-to-one, a few other things too.
Mm-hmm.
But I always give the instruction that it's really important that people are having their own journey and they are in charge of their own journey as well. And what that means is sometimes if we want a more intense experience, we breathe deeper, we breathe faster. And I know you do quite a bit of breath work now. So it's like if we're doing the Wim Hof, you know, we're kind of pumping up if we want to go deeper and have a more intense experience. And likewise, if things are getting a little bit too intense and we want to slow down, okay, we breathe shallower, we go a little bit slower. And so this, I think, is really important for people to also learn to moderate their own system and behavior. And then if you're working one-to-one in a space with somebody, again, it's a completely different scenario as well, because typically when people are supported in that environment, they allow, or the part of their psyche allows them to go deeper because they're in an environment where they know they'll be supported. So often that's a little bit of the fail safe is going on in the background as well. And that's often the reason that we have this trauma, and it could be big trauma, like big T, as they call it, or it could be really small things, right? We don't know until they're coming up, but sometimes we have these big things that are hidden. And it's not until we start chipping away that we realize how much of an impact they have had on our perception. And I know, talking about the name of the podcast, it's like how much our perception is shaped by our early years experience, by our societal experience. And we're almost in this tunnel that's being created that we don't even know that we have. And so again, when we start opening up our reality tunnel to different experiences, it might feel like, oh, this is strange, this is weird. Like me talking about how breathwork can take you into an altered state beyond your thinking mind. Yeah, that happens. We're both sitting here talking about the fact that this happens, and many, many more people around the world are talking about how this happens, and the scientific evidence is growing to show that this is what's happening. And not to say that this hasn't been done for thousands of years by the Indians, the yogis, pranayama. This is not a new thing. So, but I think we've lived in this environment, certainly the last few hundred years, of this medicalized model that has limited our knowledge and experience of what we're really capable of as humans. And so when we tap into the breath, we can directly access that, which is, I want to say, how you can understand your personal truth, which I think is a really, really powerful way of self-sourcing your own beliefs. And the reason I say that is that I didn't have this realization till a couple of months ago when a friend of mine reached out and said, what's the difference between your breath work and this breath work and that breath work and that? And I said, nothing really. I said, there isn't. It's all breathing. It's all breath. And there are some schools that get like, oh, this is mine. This is this. This is this, right? But what occurred to me, and I shared with him, is breath is truth. Like breath will take you to the truth. So whatever technique you're doing, and they have, yes, different effects, whether they're calming, whether they're relaxing, whether they're energizing, whether it's more trance state, which is typically what the stuff that I typically do, it leads you back to yourself.
So what is self? Like,
The nothingness of all is. That's the question, right? That's the exploration, I guess. Is recognizing that self is beyond what we have been conditioned to believe self is. You know, our identity, our personality, this box, this perception, the masks that we present. Yeah, it's a good question. What is self?
I'm the one asking the question.
Damn it.
Just kidding. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned it before, you said you mentioned numbness, and for me personally, it's a journey, like very much in the mind, and then I was maybe there's something like emotions stuck, or so I need to release them, I need to like take them out and like
exterminate them.
I was like very detached from emotions and very rational approach to life. And like if you mentioned that you experience numbness, like would you say this is just an individual, like just an individual experience, or is that something like very common, or like are we in touch with our emotions, or like is that a social phenomena, or
to give a bit of context, the reason I knew I was numb to my emotions is that it's probably 10 years ago now. I went through quite a difficult period in my life. I would probably describe as a quarter life crisis. And it was the end of a relationship. And one of my friends got diagnosed with cancer, and, you know, in a very, very short space of time, and she's fine. But it was a very intense period of time. And for many, many years, I was one of those people that was the strong one, that was there for everybody else, that had it all together, you know? Mm-hmm. And in that time, everything broke apart, and I was completely overwhelmed by my emotions. Like I was up and down and crying and a crazy person to some degree, because I was completely overwhelmed by my emotions from having been completely really numb. And I couldn't express my emotions at that time. I didn't really know what I was feeling. And I think in some way that's a personal thing to me, but also I think it is quite a wide experience of many people. Lots of people that I speak to have that kind of experience where they don't necessarily feel that much, or they feel quite detached. And I feel that this has become part of the way that our societies have coped or have been conditioned over time. And if you think about humans as organic material, right, we are naturally feeling beings. We are sentient. We are, I once saw this or experienced this vision or awareness of how our body is like a sensory organ. You know, it's sensing time and space and temperature and touch. And it's really the way that we navigate and understand the world. But I think as societies, we've been traumatized in various ways and detached from that nature, because when we are sensitive to it, it's overwhelming. When we're sensitive to our feelings, as you might have found in your experience, it can be overwhelming. It's like, oh, I don't want to feel this now. Like, go away. I just like close it all up, right? Whereas in my experience, what the work is to feel through it and stay open. Because actually the sensation that's happening in the body really is just a sensation. The emotion, the energy that's moving through the body is a sensation. And then we typically put a label or a name to it. Like, this is grief, or I feel angry, or I feel right? They're all different textures of this energy moving through the body. And so if we can be more in a space of curiosity and just allowing and working with our breath, for example, to allow the energy to move through, this is how we stay open. And one of my mentors will say is that the more work you do, you don't feel less, you feel more. But you're able to be fluid and not attach so much to what's happening and move that energy through your body to come back to a place of neutral. But you're feeling more and more, not less and less.
You're kind of expanding your sensitivity.
Yeah. You're expanding your sensitivity and learning to manage it. And I think this is the sometimes what I foresee or see that happens in psychedelic experience is that people that had no, and even just, you know, one breathwork session, I think it was why it was so impactful in that environment too, is that the people that were really in their heads, they would have a physical experience of the body of like, whoa, what's this? Crazy. This is my body. Like, why is my hand like this? I couldn't open my mouth and my head is buzzing. And I felt like somebody's hand was on my chest, all this kind of crazy stuff, right? And there was nobody there. And that's just eye-opening in itself, right? Oh, and I feel these tingles and my legs were shaking. And then you can go into the psychedelic experience, which can be really super powerful in opening you up. And then feeling like, you know, everything is just so overwhelming because all of a sudden your senses are blown open. Like, now what? Ah! Feel like this newborn baby, right, in the world, and you don't really know, everything's coming at you. So it's feeling, I think, is our nature, but as I said, I feel that many, for various different reasons, we've moved away from that human aspect. And this is also how I really feel we can tap into our intuition and the truth for what's right for us. Because doing it just from a mental place, we're going to get it wrong. Because the body, again, like when we cut our hand, the body has all of this intuitive wisdom, instinctual wisdom, right? We survived in the wild before we were in these houses. And so if we can't tap into that, it's very difficult for us to really know what's true, particularly living in a world of so many lies.
Is it? Yeah.
We're just in the mental, right? And we're just sucking in and taking in whatever's on the news. And I've been out of the news and stuff for like 8 years plus. But otherwise we are susceptible to just taking on face value what we are shown. And as we were talking about earlier, this piece of where we feel cognitive dissonance, where there's a part of us that knows something isn't right because our body maybe is telling us something isn't right, but our mind is saying, oh, no, that's okay. And many of us have learned to distrust our body. Oh, it's anxiety. I shouldn't have this. I should take a pill. Well, maybe that anxiety, that feeling is something underlying that's actually trying to tell you something. It's trying to alert you to this dissonance, to something not being right. Rather than dismissing it, let's be curious and investigate it.
That's super interesting. And you talk about perception. And I know that you also work or incorporate the chakra system. Like you might explain that. But what I'm wondering, would you say that depending on, like, maybe you can explain what that is, but depending on how the energy is circulating or not, like if there's blocked energy or not, that is kind of defining the perception you're looking through at the world?
Yeah, totally. So I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with the chakra system, the energy system of the body. What I'll just throw in here a little bit is another modality that I do, which is called the spiral. And this is really a tool for elevating your level of consciousness. And the theories behind it incorporate, and this is kind of separate to breathwork, but I do this work incorporated with breathwork, and it's really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
It really works on the basis that we have these different energy centers in our body, which also relate to certain core emotions. So for example, our root chakra, our base chakra down at the bottom of our spine, typically in this model relate to shame and guilt and dogma. So all of our rules, all the things we feel bad for, the fact that we feel like a bad person, right? And this is also related to our level of consciousness. So in this model, it's an overlay of the chakra system, of spiral dynamics, of the scale of consciousness, of the Chinese medicine system in terms of the elements, and kinesiology. What it really looks at is that where we have these patterns, where we have certain anchors. So you're familiar with NLP? I think you do some of this work too.
Yes, I've never like officially learned it, but yes, I know it. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, what in this work happens with perceptions is that in our younger years we have certain experiences, and we anchor our beliefs and behaviors to those experiences, usually negative ones. But they're just how we learn and adapt to survive in our family of origin. And some of those adaptations can actually hold us back and be blocked, right? So the spiral is a process of going through all of these different blockages, that almost the anchors that I want to say, the anchors that hold our false self in place.
Does this relate to beliefs or emotional blockages, or is this the same? Or
I would say both.
okay.
So it's our adaptive responses that also have knock-on emotional expressions as well. So as an example, how this works is that age, for example, if we take guilt, right? Or yeah, we'll take guilt. So as a young child, and this is what I do, some of the work that I do with this as well, is we go through and identify where your first experiences of guilt were, and what other emotion you had anchored to that experience of guilt. And so it could be that you experienced something at age 2 or 3, and we do this with kinesiology testing. That
I just forgot, like kinesiology is basically asking your body intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Like your body responds. You
yes.
like ask a question, and then whatever, like there's a cramp or not, or like in your muscles.
Yeah. So kinesiology is a method of testing the body for a strong or a weak response. So again, relying on, and this is spoken about in the book Power versus Force, which also references the scale of consciousness, is that our body will respond either strongly to something that is congruent, right? And where our body and mind are in dissonance, we get a weak response. And so in this way, we can test the body for almost like yes or no. And we can use the body as an instrument to guide us towards things that may perhaps be blocked, to release.
So it's like a lie detector. Basically,
yeah. And so, for example, with this, we can identify at specific ages when guilt was first experienced, and then what the corresponding emotion was, because the initial experience of guilt might have then produced fear. So I feel bad, I feel guilty, and now I'm scared because I'll be in trouble, right? And then maybe later on, at the age of 5, we steal somebody's, I don't know, sweets at school, right?
Yeah.
We get in trouble with the teacher, and we feel really guilty because our parents are going to tell us off, and we feel that emotion might be shame. We feel really like less than, like we're a terrible person. And typically those first 2 or certainly 3 experiences of these emotions, we start to build a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so that story then influences our behavior. So now, as typically those patterns get set in place in very, 0 to 7 years when we're in this open state of hypnosis, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then we carry those patterns on as adults, right? Everything that we make automatic goes in here, and then we carry those patterns. So it might be that now as an adult, typically when you feel guilty, you also feel fear, and then you feel shame. It's like this kind of toxic cocktail of crap from those initial, right? From those initial experiences.
It's the spice of life. Yeah.
The spice of life, shame and guilt. Shame and guilt. And so where we have these blockages, or where we have these emotions linked to perceptions and experiences, we're not really free. And so we have these at different levels. So the example I gave is the root chakra, and this relates to really our primal nature as well. Our animalistic eat, sleep, survival functions, right? And also our feeling of belonging. So even below that is like our feeling of deserving to even be alive. Because that's what shame does. It will say, you're a terrible person, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, we live in very much shame-based cultures, particularly with things like the major religions. It's like, you're not good enough. You have to repent. You have to overcome. You have to show your worth.
You're a sinner.
You're a sinner, rather than, no, you already have inherent worth. So those are some of the other things that keep us stuck and in these modes of being that are not really sovereign. They're part of a system. So in that way, we can have these different blockages at different levels. As I said, this is something I do as a process of identifying and clearing out, because when you identify and clear them out, you're it's like writing a new program. Now you have a blank slate to write a new program. Okay, that's the old program. We'll delete the code for that. Now, what do I want to create? Who do I want to be? Who do I believe I am in my core? What do I believe my purpose is? Whether it's to be a leader of this or a parent in that, whatever it is, then we clear the code so we can be.
And how do you clear it?
So in that example, we identify it, and then we use kinesiology points, which is actually on the top of the head here. And there are other points you can use, but this is the simplest one. And using intention and using some breath work. So it's a combination of things. Like, okay, this is what we identify. How does that relate to you? Do you see a pattern of that in your life? Yep. Oh, that experience came up, often triggers memories. And then we activate those feelings and emotions that are present with the breath. And then we set the intention with using these acupressure points to actually release that pattern. And often when you do this, it's kind of like we keep breathing, we keep moving the energy through the body, and then often go to a space of calm, because that emotional energy from those original triggers has actually been resolved.
This is something which is permanent?
Yes.
Like this is a once and a done deal, really? Yeah.
Yeah, in the sense of you remove the original pattern. Now, it's not permanent if you still want to have the same thoughts. But typically speaking, if you remove the pattern, you also remove the connection to the thoughts. But for example, if you if you really wanted to stay stuck and rehabilitate all of those thoughts that were with that pattern, you could do it, but it would be more difficult, if that makes sense. So it really is like removing the pattern, because it's and by doing so, we're actually raising a level of consciousness as well. Because all of these these heavier, the lower chakras are very much related to these heavier emotions. Like I mentioned, shame and guilt and fear and anger, right? You're familiar with the scale of consciousness?
I've seen it, I've heard about it, but if you could rephrase it or summarize it in 10 seconds or 20 seconds, if that's possible. Like,
I told you I've got a lot. I can talk for hours. So I warned you. It's the scale of human emotion. And there are there's a bottom and a top.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom are things like shame and guilt, and they're really heavy to feel. We feel heavy when we have those experiences. And on the other end of the scale are things like joy and peace and love. And so typically we're carrying as a society,
every emotion relates to a certain frequency.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. So where we have these almost trapped heavier emotions, we're trapped in that same energy density or dynamic. So by releasing the emotions, we actually change our frequency. And we also, where I say about breathwork, often we repress the things we don't want to feel. We get numb because I don't want to feel bad, don't want to feel those nasty things, but it also reduces our bandwidth. Then we don't even feel good. We just feel in the middle, like, okay, nothing's good, nothing's bad. And so that's my experience of breathwork and these other modalities, is increasing our bandwidth, being able to feel more, experience more, but not getting attached to it. So you can still feel, when you go through this process, you can still feel shame, but you don't personally identify as, I'm a terrible person, right? It changes our dynamic, it changes our relationship.
So you're moving more into the observer position instead of identifying yourself with the emotion.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. And you said, like, just to like close the full picture, like you're kind of releasing that pattern, but then you have to like put something new in place. So like a new truth, a belief, a behavior, like to replace the old one with something you consciously decide, or you just remove it and then it's over. It's like this is if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe I believed I'm not worthy and whatever, like release that emotion, but then would I define what's the actual truth? Like I'm worthy just by being, or something like that, or
yeah, absolutely. You can change in terms of using affirmations, and as you probably remember, I do a lot of positive affirmation work in the breathwork as well, because when we're in this altered state in the breathwork, our mind is open to suggestion. It's like hypnosis, really. We can soak up this information that, again, reprograms. So these different tools that I use, they work together, really, just to different ways. The spiral is a bit more like sometimes laser surgery to identify the specific problem or the specific emotion or belief or thought, because you can get really specific. But when it comes to programming something new, you become open, right? And so when you clear the things holding you, you have more choice. You have more choice available to you than the limitation that you had before. So now I have more choice. My belief, experience, I guess, is our work as humans is to learn how to harness our free will in harmony with what's really true in our hearts and what's aligned with us in life. So as a co-creation between, I want to say, our will and God's will, or our will and nature's will, or our will and divine will, or our will and the greater force of whatever it is that is creating this reality, this consciousness or consciousnesses. And so then when we clear some of these old anchors that were not true, we can then have a choice to align our free will with something that we now want. And so that for me is the reprogramming. So now I often, when I do this process with people, they perhaps haven't really been following their true passion or path because they had expectations, their parents had expectations about their job, who they should be. And so some of that external validation expectation starts to drop away, Now it's like, oh, that wasn't really me. Now these are the things I really like to do. This is what I want to do. This is what I love to do at school, or a creative, or I want to pursue this career. It doesn't have to be career, but this is typically what happens. Things start opening up, and then it's about directing your will to what's really true for you. And so that can be a little bit at a time, step by step. Oh, this now feels good for me. This now feels good for me. And it's kind of finding that path for sovereignty, and directing your will.
And
Does that make sense?
yeah, it's I mean, super interesting because that's also something I've been thinking a lot about, if free will actually exists, or like, or within which boundaries. It's a really interesting topic. And do you think that every human can have purpose, and can like, are there people which like they're meant to have a life with purpose, and others which are not? Or is it just a matter of waking up to your true self, and then you automatically get close or find it? Or like
Yeah.
like
This is the age-old question. There's so many books and personal development people out there talking about find your purpose, live your passion, right? And it's like, woo! And I was in that camp of like, what's my purpose? What am I here to do? I knew I was here to make a difference, or support people, or help people. And that was how I ended up doing breathwork. In the years that I was doing insurance, it was one of the reasons that I left, is that I didn't feel it was completely aligned to me supporting people. Maybe I was going to retrain as a physiotherapist, etc. And I never did. And subsequently, breathwork found me, and I found myself in that environment, in like therapeutic environment, helping people, which was great. What I came to realize is, I think over the years, is that there's not really a purpose external to you. Purpose for me is more about being the fullest version of yourself and putting your energy and passion into the things that inspire you, into the things that you care about. And so I believe in that sense, in that way, that yeah, everybody has a unique purpose to express their soul, to express their unique gifts, to touch people's lives in their own unique way. And I think we have a lot of resistance to doing that, because we've had these systems and measures of what success is in society that aren't really based on that. They're based on external metrics of having a business, or earning this much money, or having the six-pack, or whatever it is, rather than valuing the unique qualities of every person. And so if we take that back, it's like, oh, well, now I have control of that. I get to decide what I choose to do, how I express my energy. I think when we're not connected to that purpose, it actually messes us up really badly, because there's all this activation energy. This energy is here. And I find that I do quite a lot of work with men as well. And I find this often, if we don't express that energy in a way, if we don't put it behind something, it actually comes back and eats us alive. It creates all kinds of problems, because that energy just wants to be expressed and used towards something. And there's an unending amount of it. Obviously, we have to take care of our physical body, but there is this kind of font of energy. And so finding how best to express that for you, I think is the challenge of getting into that alignment. So purpose and alignment for me go hand in hand. One of my dear friends and yoga teachers said, it's not transformation that takes time, it's the alignment. So really, when you drop all of the things that aren't you, you naturally start coming more and more into that alignment. And I think that's when we also get more and more energy behind what we're doing, and the path becomes clearer. Because I think there is definitely a bit of a no man's land in the personal development field, where we start breaking down everything. We're like, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And then you'll be like, but if I'm not that, what am I?
I had one of those interesting weeks this year.
Right.
So,
yeah.
What the fuck? I'm not that, but what will be left? like That's scary. That doesn't make
Yeah,
any sense. That's not who I am, what I am, but then what's left? Like,
yeah, yeah. And then we often, what happens is we have to go through that period to then again connect with this inherent energy, this, you know, this or intrinsic energy that's already here, that wants to express towards something, wants to create in some way. And then it's, for me, it's about being a vessel, the vessel for the best expression of that energy. And sometimes, as we kind of started talking about it before we were recording this, but the thing that I'm next stepping into is, I feel like we're always working with avatars, we're working with personas, we're working with archetypes. Okay, so now I want to embody this quality. Okay, what would I need to, what would that look like? What would my behaviors be? What would I do? How would I speak? What would I tell myself? What would I wear? So we can embody these avatars to actually try them on for size, to develop the qualities as we continue to expand. And I think there are multiple of them. It doesn't mean wearing a mask, but it means, I think, investigating and expressing this human form that we have, this dynamic consciousness that we have, that can mold and shape and shapeshift.
and yeah, it's a pleasure. And I mean, we spoke before we started recording a little bit, and you shared that you changing a little bit gears, or like a little bit direction, or you have new projects coming in. If we talk about purpose, like what's your purpose, and what's your life vision, if you have one, and you want to share it?
Yeah, so my purpose is, what came to me a few years, is about helping clearing the slate for the conscious evolution of humanity. It's quite a grand thing, you know, it's up there. What does that mean in real terms? It means it's related to the project that I'm now about to embark on, as you mentioned, which is combining my experience in the insurance industry and also the well-being industry, and raising the standard for health and well-being on a global scale, from an education perspective, within the workplace, because my background in negligence claims and negligence insurance, I believe there's a very strong link between stress and negligence in that world, for example. And so I'm planning on writing a book to speak to some of that. And part of that book is also looking at how that industry really is not fit for purpose that it was once created for, to spread risk, to help people in difficult times. I believe it's now perpetuating, you know, cycles of victim consciousness. It's been overtaken by a kind of capitalist system. And so this is where I'm now stepping more into, is not necessarily the coaching space, even though that's obviously what I do, but more into the leadership in that space of where my unique qualities come into play, you know, all those 12 years of that experience and knowledge, and all I've learned in this field of consciousness and healing and transformation and health over the last few years. Because I feel like there's a bigger question, like the bigger question for me, and I think we mentioned this briefly, is how do we ensure, because my background, the basics for everybody on the planet? You know, the capitalist model doesn't work. I'm not suggesting I know the answer to the next solution, but how do we ensure that everybody on the planet has food? How do we ensure that everybody has access to clean water, shelter? You know, the very, very basic necessities of life, clean air, community. You know, it's not, these things aren't rocket science. So I guess that's one of the bigger questions that I'm asking myself at the moment. And how do we create the conscious businesses, the conscious leaders of the future, that I believe doing this work, and particularly with breathwork and the spiral and other things that I've done, being able to increase or expand my level of awareness, my level of consciousness. I think as a species, you know, for the planet, we need different solutions. I think it's an Einstein quote. He says, you won't create solution to the problem at the same level of consciousness that create the problem, right? And so I feel like part of my work is to help leaders and people in organizations actually raise their level of consciousness so they can look at the solutions in a different way. They can look at problems in a different way, because the same kind of thinking is not going to get us a different outcome to where we're currently headed. And the trajectory right now is not particularly good. So I guess that all feeds in together as my work of like helping us raise our consciousness so that we can make better decisions for a more, you know, sustainable and loving future that I think we all aspire to.
Sounds amazing, and I'm in. And so your solution like is about educating leaders, like raising their awareness, so that they treat or interact with others in a different way, which then has second order consequences of better well-being for other people on this planet. Or?
Yes. And my angle is actually into the insurance industry, and this is why I'm planning on writing this book right now, is that the insurance industry touches every business in the world. And so in terms of affecting change, what I believe is systemic change is required, and that means from the top down. So my original business vision with Versicle was to support businesses with their well-being solutions, you know, their client engagement. It was well-being, innovation, and change. So how do we make the most of our resources, what we've already got, and really create a healthy environment? And then a few years down the track, I've realized this direct link between stress and negligence, as I said. And I believe there's a direct positive impact to be gained for both business and also the insurance industry by advocating for this change. So what I'm going to be advocating for, I guess, in the work that I'm doing at the moment, is to the insurance industry to advocate change for their clients. And so rather than going to businesses one at a time, making the change from the top at a regulator position or an insurance company or insurance network position that actually drives positive change in a systemic way. And like I said, I believe that some of these practices, and it could be things like breathwork, but our general awareness and our general response to well-being practices, I think over the last few years has been, oh, it's kind of nice to have, but you know, we don't really need it. And I actually believe the opposite. I feel that we have so much technology these days, as been seen with what we're doing right now. We're able to homework. We've got all of this tech, we've got AI, we've got automation, etc. Mm-hmm. What about our human intelligence? What about the organic material that actually powers these businesses, right? So this is what I've been playing with very much. Businesses as an organization and an organism. And organizational health really is the catch-all phrase that this business that I'm creating at the moment is looking to support and address. So that could be very, very simply, what's the well-being package that you're offering for staff to support them in their home working, for example, all the way through to kind of you know, systems consultancy, communications, engagement, leadership development, training. So you're really looking at the organization as a whole and how it functions, rather than just the kind of bottom line, what do we need to do as a minimum to make sure that we meet our, you know, legal obligations. So that's the shift, I guess, I'm looking to create, and why it's specific to the insurance industry. I believe that actually the insurance industry has a really big opportunity to be a force for good and to redress some of the balance in this, I guess, technological age that's overtaken us. And I think we need to start rewinding and coming back to what is important and prioritizing that over the glorification of busy and the glorification of making money for the sake of making money.
And like, if I'm playing devil's advocate here, like, we're living in a capitalist system, and like, the thesis is that as long as the employees produce like what is expected from them, like, I don't really like care about their well-being. So if you came to me and like, yeah, like, like,
Yeah.
Organizational health, and I would say, like, I'm not really interested. I'm interested in like bottom line, making money, and
Yeah.
like, what would be the benefit from a corporate perspective of?
Well, good point.
Of
The great news is that there is much more research coming out on this. And
Mhm.
I think it was Deloitte that published a paper. I was asking myself the very same question. What's the ROI? How do I show the ROI?
Mhm.
You know, the return on investment for this. And helpfully, Deloitte's published a paper, an update to a paper that they published previously. I think it's in January 2020, just before this whole, pandemic situation
Mhm.
arose. And in that research study, they showed that the average return on well-being spend was 9 to 1. So actually, from a productivity and from a performance perspective, what the evidence is suggesting is that in investing in well-being is actually going to produce a positive return on investment, and quite a significant one. Because actually what we know is more engaged employees, happier employees do better work, full stop. So I think I'm not talking to anything new. I don't think it's rocket science. It's not novel. It's almost like a reminder that people matter, and that we need to take better care of people. And by the way, there's this evidence to suggest that there is a significant benefit to be had. And on the other hand, also the insurance industry, in the particular sector that I'm familiar with, there is an intense pressure at the moment in that sector, because there are significant claims, the costs are going up. And so that not only impacts the insurance industry, it impacts their clients negatively as well. And so where I foresee the link between negligence and stress, actually there's a positive cycle to be had there. By reducing stress in the workplace, actually reduces exposure for insurance companies, which subsequently over time will reduce the cost to the clients and improve the well-being of their staff. So all of this thing, this is why Versicle as well the name came, because when I was first having these ideas 5 years ago, the virtuous circle, where there's a win-win all round for everybody, was really the premise of it. And I was like, virtuous circle. Oh, Versicle. And then that was where it came from. So,
super cool. And how if you could elaborate a little bit about, I think you called it victim consciousness. Like, what's that? And like,
how would you describe victim consciousness? Well, there's a very simple way of explaining it.
Or who is in it, or like,
who's in it? Most people are in it. And me, I've been in it, One of the easy ways to explain it is that in the scale of consciousness that I mentioned, there's a certain point where we move from being a victim, like life is happening to us, to being a creator, where we are operating on life.
Is there a certain emotion attached to that, like threshold?
I think it's, in the terms of the vibration, I think it's at the 250 level, which is like a space of neutrality.
Okay.
So we have like what we would suggest are like the negative emotions. We move up to neutrality before we start moving into the what perceived as positive emotions. They're just different vibrations as far as I'm concerned. They're all valid. And so I guess that's one measure of where victim consciousness, where we're subjected to life, everything is happening to us, we don't have any control, to moving into creator and being sovereign and recognizing that we are responsible for creating our life, right? And the effects of our actions are what manifest into the world, going into our future, which doesn't exist because only the present exists. But anyway, that's another conversation. But also, right? we go then. What is time? We could go on for like 5 hours, like I said. But the other part is what's called the drama triangle. Are you familiar with the drama triangle?
Like, please explain it to me.
We'll talk about that, which is we have a victim, right? We have a victim, and we have what's called a villain or perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the other person at the top of the triangle, which is the rescuer or the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so typically what's happening is somebody's being, in the victim, they don't want to take responsibility for their actions or their life. Or this is also, I think, how humans unfortunately don't understand the actual rules of life, or the rules of the universe, laws of the universe, shall we say. Mm-hmm. Laws of cause and effect, and all of these kind of basic things that we don't get taught. Law of compensation and all of this other stuff. Law of attraction, that's the one that most people talk about, but they don't talk about all the other ones. And so, we have this victim, and then we have somebody that's, that's doing the wrong thing, the baddie, the joker in, right? And then we have the hero that's coming in to save the victim, right? Coming in to save the day, or also known as the rescuer. So the person that looks after everybody and that has to make sure everybody's okay. And so typically what we're doing is most people in our society and the level of consciousness that we're operating in, we're often playing out this, what's called a drama triangle, and we move between roles. So we're either, and we're in our kind of animalistic emotions, really. That's another story too. Mm-hmm. But we're either, feeling sorry for ourselves, or we're feeling like we're going to better than the other person because we're the hero and we're looking after people. And so this is typically what we're in. We're in this kind of dynamic, and we're always in this emotional drama of moving from one role to the other, because we're not fully in ourselves. And this is what I was referring to also in the insurance industry, is that where we have a lot of the legal cases, for example, and we have lawyers suing each other, or defending cases or making cases, that actually some of this is creating more pain and suffering because of the tactics used in litigation, than actually coming together for mediation and to actually create a positive resolution. And that's what I mean by, I feel that not just the insurance industry, I think there are many other aspects of business, and I guess in the capitalist model, are perpetuating these negative cycles for financial gain, and not for, okay, what's the best outcome for all involved? What's the loving thing? What's the generative thing? It's like, how can I get mine? Because we've become a culture driven by money, right? Money is the new God, right? I must have money. I think over time that has crept into, there's a loophole here. If I do this, I can make a bit extra. Another loophole, I can make a bit extra over there, and then more people come into that loophole, right? And we see it as normal, but actually what it's doing is undermining some of the fundamental principles that these systems were put in place for in the first place. And somebody's taking advantage, not intentionally necessarily, but taking advantage of the situation. And business is built on taking advantage of particular situations. Does that make sense?
So it's basically, it's like what is happening is a function of the consciousness of people involved in it, and basically people are sucked into a certain vibration frequency and act accordingly. And whatever, like if the frequency elevates or changes, they would like maybe identify themselves differently, they would operate in a different way, and also the outcome would be different.
Yeah, I believe so. And partly the word that's been coming up for me recently is interconnectedness. And this is one of the beauties of doing something like breathwork or having a psychedelic experience. You recognize, and I'm sure you'll relate to this, how everything is interconnected. Even if we've lived in our heads our whole life, we can have this very different view of the world, of how we are not separate from what we see on the outside of us. And I think that's where we lose sight. And also, like you say, we get sucked into this particular avenue of consciousness where everybody is in agreement and not recognizing that if I do this, lifting a cup up, for example, this has an impact somewhere else. Right? I'm exerting energy through my arm. It's not just me lifting a cup up. Everything that's connected is changing the way I sit. It's moving the air around me, and that we are connected to everything. And I think that's the danger of being numb and having so much of a tech overload, is that we lose that connection. We lose the connection to what is right. And when I say this, the substance of the universe, if we use the word love, like everything is made from something, right? From something very natural and something that's naturally benevolent, I want to say. And so we lose touch with that benevolence because we get into our drama triangles, we get into our survival, scarcity, animal nature, which is unfortunately perpetuated and pressed upon by the media. And we can't see the bigger picture, what's right for us or our families. And one way I think of this came to me probably a few years ago, was if we looked at business like how we bring children up. Okay, what am I going to do over the next 20 years? Right, rather than 6 months or quarterly, what I need to tell my shareholders, what decisions I need to make to keep my shareholders happy. How different would the world be?
You mentioned something before, natural law, which I think just 2 months ago I stumbled upon natural law, and it was really interesting. And not just interesting, it was incredibly helpful to make more sense out of things. Yeah. And it's not sure if we relate to the same principles, I assume so. But the question I was asking myself, like, this is literally about what and how operates, what is the mechanism of reality? Like, this should be the first thing to learn in school.
Right.
And I, with 37, stumble by, like, I don't call it accident. Yeah. Like, I mean, there was a reason that I found it. Yeah. But like with 37 years, I stumbled upon this. Yeah. Like, it's, better now than never, but, or later, but I was just, oh man, this is incredible. And maybe you, like, I don't know, how did you discover natural law, or what is natural law? Like, how did it change your perspective, or if it did, I don't know. Or
it's not an area I've delved into a huge amount, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But as you say, there are certain parts of it that make so much sense. When we are in that breaking down part, that can be quite uncomfortable, and recognizing that perhaps our reality isn't what it seems on the outside. I think certain of the laws, like I mentioned, like law of attraction is the one that really gets the headlines. Everybody's like, law of attraction, read The Secret, and you think about it, you're going to manifest it, and what you think about, you create, right? You draw into your reality, and that is true, and that goes for what you want to create in a negative sense and a positive sense. So those negative thoughts are going to create more negative thoughts, and they're going to make you feel crap about yourself.
So it's also your personal reference frame, no? The reference frame which defines what you're creating. Like, if you don't know who you are, or if you think you're this title or whatever, like this description, and you're creating from that perspective, it's very different than, like, if you might have a larger picture of who you are. And also you mentioned interconnectedness.
Totally. And coming back to the spiral process I do, when you're limited by your kind of a lot of heavy past perceptions, you're creating from that space. It's like you can't really see the wood from the trees because you're just so thick in this matrix of stuff. It's very difficult to know who you are. And one of the things I say about breathwork is that breathwork reconnects you to your soul, right? And then I don't need to tell you who you are because you know. You know, that's the anchor, that's the direction. You will know from an internal place. And so in this kind of sometimes period of confusion, I think understanding, learning about natural law can be helpful, because something like the law of attraction also makes us realize that life is benevolent, and actually life is always giving us an opportunity to grow and develop and release attachments, release negative or false beliefs or perceptions. And so where we have a false perception, you know, the law of something like the law of attraction is going to continue to bring that thing to us until we become aware enough to recognize what we're holding on to and process it in some way. And then when we do that, we shift into, again, a different level of consciousness. So I feel like this is always continuing to expand, but some of these very basic principles are helpful, like law of compensation. Like I said, if I do this, something happens. You know, something's always happening. Energy isn't created or destroyed. Something is happening. And if I do this over here, there's going to be a consequence. So if I make perhaps a negative choice, there is going to be a consequence. Perhaps I don't feel it or see it immediately, but it doesn't mean to say it's not happening. And that's, I think, where we touched on briefly earlier, but that we get caught in time, our perception of time, about we don't see the immediate cause, you know, the law of cause and effect. We don't see in our physical slowed down reality the immediate cause and effect. Doesn't mean to say it's not happening. And then when we become aware of that, we can start to actually understand that how we are perhaps causing some of the negative things that are, or positive things that are happening in our life. So I think, yeah, it's helpful as a reference point, because they are so much wider than, you know, you're not going to get that from the Bible.
No, even there's a lot of good information in there. But what also is so difficult to, for example, what you just mentioned, cause and effect, but there's this time delay in between. So it's not so obvious to recognize it. That you're actually like creating your reality.
Yeah.
And also that what you think you focus on is not necessarily what you actually focus on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, we have been talking quite a bit about breath work. So is there a daily routine you are doing, or you would recommend anyone, or is that like is there something which you
yeah, I would say find something that works for you, and perhaps we can link to an audio file that I have that people can try.
Okay. Yes.
On SoundCloud, so you can try that out. That's just a daily guided practice. Generally speaking, I find that if you make it too complicated and too rigid, you won't do it. I find this for myself. If I have to do something, then I rebel and I don't do it.
So you don't have a daily routine or something like that?
Not specifically. Often now, these days, I will, before I get up in the morning, I will lay in bed and do breath work, and I'll do the style of connected breath work that I teach for a period of time, and I'll set an intention, generally to be clear or to be connected with my purpose for the day. I might set something specific if I want guidance or information or whatever. And then as and when I feel I am perhaps going on a tangent, if I feel there's emotional stuff coming up in my body, I will take some time to actually use my breath to process that through. And that might be a few times a day. It might not come up at all. And what I find is variety, you know, experiment and find something that you like. There are definitely breathwork exercises that energize you, and there are definitely breathwork exercises that can calm you down literally in a couple of minutes. So things like box breathing, and there's another one called 4-7-8 breathing, which are both really good for kind of calming. Focus 4-7-8 specifically for sleeping, reduction in anxiety. And then there are other breathing techniques, like things like breath of fire, which are more energizing, and obviously like Wim Hof, which I find quite energizing. The work that I do, which is conscious connected breathing, which is pretty energizing.
Is that different to transformational breath? Is that the same, or is something else? Or like, also, if you said, or we will share this audio audio file.
Yeah.
But like, I think we have not talked about that, and for some listeners, like, they might not really know, like, how should I be breathing, or like how does it actually look like? So like, maybe if you want to quickly share something about that.
Yeah. So in the audio it's the connected breath, it's the transformational breath style. With these other breathing techniques, and just generally day to day. So this is what I want to say about breathing and breath work. Everybody's been doing it really well because you're still alive, right?
Yeah.
Day to day, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we should be breathing in and out through our nose. Actually, mouth breathing is quite detrimental to our health. And our nose has filters, it heats the air, actually causes nitrous oxide to be released, which is really healthy for our body. So day to day, we should be breathing in and out through our nose. The two core mechanisms are, our inhale is related to our stress response, our sympathetic response, our fight or flight response, right? And it's like driving a car. So that's like the gas on the car, our inhale. And our exhale is like the brake pedal on our car. And this activates our parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest response. So by playing with these two pedals, ideally, like day-to-day life, we want our breath in and out to be even, right? And this keeps us in a balance. When we're too much of it, if we're breathing in our chest, we're often pressing on the accelerator pedal, and if we do that over too much time, and it's chronic stress, we get burnout. So when we press on the brake pedal, we can actually bring our system back into balance. So if we generally day to day, we want to have our breathing even. If we want to bring energy into our system, we breathe in for longer. If we want to calm our system, we breathe out for longer.
Okay.
So yeah, very, very simple. I mean, this is a little bit different to what I do when I'm doing my deeper work and my workshops, but that's really the basic mechanics of breathing and how you can directly access and change your state. So if you wanted to do, for example, the 4-7-8, or as an example, we breathe in for a count of 4, and then we breathe out for a count of 8. And so by doing that, we are pressing that brake pedal. And so we're going more into our rest and digest response, the relaxation response. And so that's something we can do day to day. One of the great things is doing a sigh, a long exhale, right? It's naturally what we do.
I also remember the tantrums.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're doing the connected breath, if you dive into to try the audio, I don't speak about that specifically on the audio, but what you can do is have a tantrum, because what happens is that the energy gets blocked in our system. That expression of our emotion often gets quite repressed and blocked. And so we use sound and movement. And as you're referring to, the movement is like having a tantrum, right? Throwing your arms and legs and just kind of generally moving your body, and sound like a or an or a hum.
Yeah.
And this is both great ways of releasing. I'm sure that's what you found. Did you tantrum?
Yeah. Actually, just 2 days ago, we had a breathing session, and there was some tantrum involved there. It was yeah, it was a good experience.
Yeah, it's great. Often we don't do that. We don't do that.
I think it was with you in the group session where we did it, or I did it for the first time, and it was really weird.
Right.
Yeah, like that was really weird. Like this is stupid.
You're not sure about this. Yeah, you're looking at me like
This
I'm
is
a crazy lady.
Okay, but they're all like when I remember, like I did a couple of breathing sessions, and the first one was with you. There was also this. I mean, there was physical sensation, then there was a bit of energy movement, but there was also a moment where it was almost like not a dissolving, but of the frontiers of what I thought was my body, and that in that moment that was scary for me, and I was like, holy fuck, no, like what is this? This is something I have not experienced, and like I need to keep control, like, and there was moments where I was a little bit almost frightened, and from personal experience, like coming from the need of control or for control, and so this was also exposing me to that in a different way.
Exposing you to your level of control that you don't really, that's really an illusion.
Yeah, so I wasn't also like, is there actually something I can or need to be afraid of? Like, my conclusion was no. Like, it's like, but then also it's interesting. Like, there might be an intellectual understanding or so, but then also just letting go of that intellectual understanding is maybe all what is needed. So I mean, like,
right.
So
yeah, there are many things in this field that don't make sense to the rational mind, and often when I'm teaching breathwork and I say your mind may distract you, it might be telling you, oh, my mouth is dry, or I feel uncomfortable, or that person is making a sound, or like you said, doing this tantrum thing is really embarrassing or awkward. And again, it's the part of us, I guess the ego aspect that wants to keep us safe, that's scouting for danger, wants to keep us safe. And so that's why it's important to work with it and use other modalities that can get you a little bit beyond that, so you can expand out of that comfort zone, because that's also, I feel, the requirement for going into that greater level of consciousness, is that we have to surrender some of that identity, some of the control that the ego has, to realize there's something bigger. And if that's on a physical level, like recognizing, oh, my body is dissolving, I don't have any boundaries anymore, what the hell am I? Oh, that's pretty disconcerting to the ego, right? And that's not even with any psychedelics, that's just with breathing, like,
I was
just
like,
dissolved, crap.
Holy fuck, what is this? Like, this is just my body. Like, there's no external stimulation here. This is just me breathing.
Right.
That was interesting.
Yeah, and so much we don't know. I think that's what it comes down to me, is there's so much mystery that we have yet to discover about life.
Yeah, I mean, really an amazing conversation.
Likewise,
Philippa,
really.
Thank you very much. Is there something you want to share, or you want to, a message, information, whatever that is?
I just want to say thank you to anybody that's listened to all of this, because it's really long. You deserve a medal. Appreciate you being I think I won't talk anymore, but I just want to say thank you for the opportunity. It's been really fun to jam and just see what comes out. I never have a script or any idea about what I'm going to talk about when I come on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a true pleasure. Thank you very much. And I mean, if you want to share whatever projects you mentioned, you're writing a book or whatever,
Yeah, oh, I
whatever
guess
you want to share with the audience. I mean, we
I'll
will
just
add it
say,
to the resources and.
yeah, that would be great. So yeah, I am writing a book. The working title is Blame, Shame and Negligence Claims. If you want to come and follow along, if you want to even contribute, I'm going to be writing and sharing as I go along. And that's the start of, I guess, my movement. And so that's at philippawilkin.com. And then my Breathworks website, breathworks.co at the moment is there. And then if you want to come and get some breathwork resources, I have a little free breathwork group, which has a couple of free trainings in, which is, I think, freeyourselfwithbreathwork.com. And then come find me LinkedIn or wherever else, Instagram, breath_works. There are a few different places you can find me. So yeah, if you found this interesting, if you want to know more, if you want to experience the breath work, if you just want to have a chat about.
You should.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm going to be setting up a breathwork membership sometime in the near future as well. So as a place where people can come and do a regular group breathwork session with me. So that's going to be coming. But yeah, lots of different ways of contacting me. So I'd love to hear from anybody that is on the same path or would like some support or has some inspiring ideas or even collaboration opportunity. You know, they want to come and jump on board anything which I'm talking about and make the world a better place.
That's the perfect ending, I guess. Thank you very much, Philippa.
So welcome. Thank you again.